The Laughing Cavalier here, presenting to you another tale of these troubled times. Today, I shall be looking at Henry VIII's campaign against France in 1513, which would culminate in the Battle of the Spurs, an engagement he would always hail as his greatest victory. Firstly, a bit of backstory. Henry VIII ascended to the throne in 1509 at the age of 17. His father, King Henry VII, had won the crown in battle in 1485, and in the subsequent years had carefully managed the finances of his realm, being cautious in foreign policy and only engaging in foreign adventures when he felt he could be sure it would be financially beneficial. Due to other shrewd policies, Henry VII had left a stable nation with a decent treasury. Henry VIII, though, was not like his father. He modelled himself after the great kings of old, particularly King Henry V, and desired to wage war against France and to reclaim what he saw as the ancient birthright of the English kings, the throne of France. The political situation on the continent would soon give the king the opportunity with which to win his new Agincourt. In 1508, Pope Julius II had formed the League of Cambrai, made up of the Papal States, the Kingdom of France, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and the Italian Duchy of Ferrara. Its purpose was to curb the growing power of the Venetian Republic, which the Pope saw as a threat to his own power in Italy. Despite some surprising victories won by the Venetians, in 1510 they were eventually forced to seek terms with the Pope. Julius, though, now had a new threat in Italy. During the war, the French had steadily been gaining more and more influence in northern Italy, much to the chagrin of the Pope. Julius now decided to form his own alliance with Venice against France and the Duchy of Ferrara. This new war, though, did not go well for the Pope, and by 1511 the French were left in charge of most of the Romagna region of Italy. The Pope was now desperate. He proclaimed a holy league against France. The Spanish and the Holy Roman Empire soon agreed to join. Henry VIII, meanwhile, had been watching these events and was now more determined than ever to use this opportunity to gain land from France. He thus signed the Treaty of Westminster with Ferdinand of Aragon, promising to aid the Holy League in its war against the French. 1511 would see the first foray of English troops into this war. 1,500 archers under the command of Thomas, Lord Darcy, were sent to support King Ferdinand in his war against the Moors. At the same time, a similar-sized force under Sir Edward Poynings was dispatched to support Margaret of Savoy, daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian, in her war against the Duke of Guelders. Poynings' campaign went well. The same could not be said for Lord Darcy. When his men arrived in Spain, Ferdinand informed them that he had called off his campaign against the Moors, meaning that they had to return back to England without ever seeing any combat, although, even in the short time they were in Spain, they faced problems. The chronicler Edward Hall recorded that the soldiers resorted to drinking hot wines and were scarce masters themselves, breaking hedges and ruining local orchards among his other outrageous deeds. In May 1512, a second foray was launched, and this expedition would be even worse than the first. The king dispatched Thomas Grey, Marquess of Dorset, with 5,000 men to aid the Spanish in their campaign to claim the province of Guyenne from the French. Ferdinand, though, did not use these English troops, and they remained in camp, waiting to be deployed. Soon enough, pestilence broke out amongst the soldiers. 3,000 fell ill, of which 1,800 would die within a few months. The English troops, utterly demoralised at the situation, elected to return home and landed in Plymouth in November, having achieved nothing. The king was furious at this turn of events. King Ferdinand put the blame firmly on Dorset, with some justification, although Dorset himself was suffering from the illness sweeping the camp. In the end, the whole affair was hushed up by the council. Henry, after these repeated failures, was now determined to personally lead a great army into France in support of the Emperor. He would face some reservations from members of his Privy Council, though. Many of its members saw no need for a costly war with the French, given how financially successful peace had been for the crown. There was also some concern that if the king were to be killed in battle, then some attempt may be made to rescue Edmund de la Pole, Earl of Suffolk, from the Tower of London. Pole was one of the last Yorkist claimants to the English throne, and had been imprisoned by Henry VII. His son, though, had a pretty simple solution to the problem of Pole, who went to the block in April of 1513. Despite the protests of the council, the king was determined to go to war and make his mark as a great soldier. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's wife, wrote to Cardinal Bainbridge, the English ambassador to the Pope, that Henry was so bent on war against the French that he would never rest until their king was utterly destroyed. The army that Henry would lead into battle was arguably the last medieval, and at the same time the first modern army England put into the field. It would require immense resources, though, to raise and maintain such a force in the field. The ordinary revenues of the crown were certainly not enough to pay for the army, so Parliament was called to levy the necessary taxes to fund the campaign. Initially, about £40,000 was raised using the old 15th and 10th systems, whereby a man in the town would contribute a tenth of his income, whereas a man in the country would contribute a 15th. The system, however, was flawed, and since some items were exempt, the system did not raise enough revenue for the campaign, so further taxes were needed. Under a new tax, commoners who owned goods worth between £2 and £10 had to contribute a shilling. For those labourers stuck on 40 shillings a year, this meant they had to give up over a week's worth of their wages to pay for the war. The gentry and nobility were not exempt either. A knight had to pay 30 shillings, a baron 40, an earl £4, and a duke 10 marks, or roughly £6, 13 shillings and fourpence. Foreign merchants in London, who were not even English subjects, were charged double the rates of the native English. Effectively, every person in the kingdom would have to contribute to this campaign. Much of the organisation and planning for this campaign lay with Thomas Wolsey. He had been born the son of a humble butcher in Ipswich. He had then become a priest and was appointed to the household of Henry VII as a royal chaplain. His meteoric rise would continue under Henry VIII, who made him his almoner, giving him a seat on the Privy Council. Despite initially being against war, he changed his mind when he saw that the king was keen on conflict, and supported the king in the council. For this, and the organisation of the subsequent campaign, he would be made a cardinal in 1514, and appointed as Lord Chancellor the following year. With Parliament approving the extra taxes, the king could now raise his army. England did not have a standing army, save for some units who guarded the king. Some of these units that went with Henry are still in service to this day. The oldest of these is the Yeomen of the Guard. This unit was raised by Henry VII after his victory at Bosworth, and were at his side at the Battle of Stoke Field in 1487. The corps today is relatively small, being only about 50 strong. During Henry's campaign, though, there were nearly 500 men on foot, and even a mounted detachment of 100 men armed with bows. Today they guard the monarch at various events. The other unit that still survives are the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen-at-Arms, simply called the Troop of Gentlemen during the reign of Henry VIII. They were raised in 1509, and its men were drawn from the youngest sons in the nobility. Armed with spear and lance, they were charged with protecting the king's life at all cost. The unit would continue to serve subsequent monarchs, most notably King Charles I during the English Civil War, when the gentlemen pensioners, as they were called at the time, protected the king's sons from capture at the Battle of Edge Hill. Today they also still guard the monarch, most notably at the state opening of Parliament every year. The rest of the army, though, was levied by the nobility and gentry of the realm, much as it had been for centuries. The men would have been predominantly made of longbone and billman, as had been the tradition. A few pikemen and gunners were beginning to make their appearance, though, the beginnings of a truly modern army. The soldiers would generally have worn white and green tunics with the Red Cross of St. George upon it. Of course, since the men had been raised by a nobleman, they would probably wear the badge of their lord as well. The bulk of the army was made up of infantry, but some cavalry were employed by the king, including the aforementioned troop of gentlemen, who would have been well armoured. One of the suits of armour made for the king, probably just after the campaign, survives to this day and can be seen in the Tower of London. It gives us a good impression of just how well protected the king was. The army was not entirely English, though. Henry hired a number of foreign mercenaries to supplement his army. Many Landsknecht mercenaries had been hired by Henry from Maximilian. They were tough German soldiers, amongst the finest mercenaries in Europe, and were highly sought after. They were very disciplined in battle when led by their own officers, but were not keen to bear the orders of a foreign officer. The king himself laid down an order to his English soldiers that no Englishman intermeddle or lodge himself within the ground assigned to the Alamains for their lodging, or to give them any reproach or unfitting language, or words by which the debate might ensue, upon pain of imprisonment, and further to be punished as the case shall require. Henry, though, didn't just put his trust in the old. He was also a pioneer of the new. His army royal contained some of the most modern artillery pieces of the era. The most valuable of these were 6 large bombards, each named after an apostle, with another 6 smaller guns. They each weighed 3 tons, which required a team of 24 horses to pull. They fired a cannonball weighing 260 pounds, and required 80 pounds of gunpowder to fire, which meant that they could only be fired 5 times a day. These 6 bombards were Henry's most prized pieces of artillery. Henry also had other pieces, including other bombards, Kataus, and Nuremberg pieces. He also had plenty of lighter guns that were more for use in the field, including demi-culverines, serpentines, falcons, and falconets. The smallest gun, the falconet, weighing about 300 pounds. In total, the king had over 800 artillery pieces with him, not including the 40 or so multi-barrelled organ guns. The army brought with it 510 tons of gunpowder for the guns, which in the case of a siege would probably last about 16 days. In total, the army royal consisted of about 36,000 men, although not all were soldiers. The king brought with him about 2,000 servants, including priests, ushers, grooms, pages, and various others. 276 of these men were responsible for provisioning and preparing meals for the king. 8 trumpeters also accompanied Henry, and they would have at least performed a military function. The 10 minstrels and players, though, were purely for the king's entertainment. Henry also brought what was effectively a mobile palace in which to house himself. Mention is made of a prefabricated timber house, complete with a fireplace and chimney that was carried in 12 carts and could be assembled and disassembled when needed. We're not sure if the king used this house for campaign. He certainly had other accommodation with him, though, including another 2 wagon loads of tents that, when assembled, covered over 4,000 square feet. A German account of the time said his tents looked like a castle or a little town with guards all around. The central tent was covered with rich cloth of gold, and had inside a gilded sideboard on which stood vessels and flagons, including drinking cups of solid gold. Wolsey, although technically only the king's almoner, had the second largest set of tents, covering 1,700 square feet, almost twice the size of Lord Lisle's tents, who was second in command. Wolsey, however, had been the brainchild behind the planning of the whole campaign, so it should not be seen as unusual that he was given spacious accommodation. The rest of the officers had their own tents. Most probably would have resided in markets that were 24 foot by 12. The common soldier, of course, did not have the luxury of a tent. With the great army assembled, the king prepared to embark for the continent for his great campaign. Whether he would achieve his great victory over the French will remain to be seen. Well, this is the end of part 1 of this series. Part 2 will cover the landing of Henry and his army in France and their first engagements. This has been the Laughing Cavalier, wishing you a good day.